Okay, in the third and final tutorial, I'm hoping that you've managed to follow the first two quite well, and you've got your custom alloy design. Of course, the spokes in this are my example, and that's where you can have your creative freedom in your alloy design. We're now going to look at wrapping the tyre around the wheel using a revolve before we use a circular pattern tool again to look at adding additional grooves and detail onto that wheel. We're going to look at it from the right hand side, and the bit that we're really interested in is this void at the top, and that's where we're going to create our sketch. So we're going to click new sketch, and we want it on the right work plane. We're going to draw it with a series of rectangles essentially. So we'll draw one that's going to fit in there, and we'll dimension it to fit more accurately in a moment. It's then going to wrap around the top as well. That one didn't work very well, I don't know why that was. So let's just delete that and draw a new rectangle in again, just there. So you can see if I cut a few chunks of this away, these parts in the middle, you can see that tyre shape building up. I'm going to do it as a solid, and I'll also use a shell feature to make it more hollow and more realistic. So let's spend a little bit of time dimensioning and constraining this sketch to one another. So I want that touching. There needs to be no gap between the alloy and the tyre. It creates that space for the pressure to build up. Okay, this line needs to be dimensioned from the center. If I can ever get it to select the right point, that would be useful. I'll try again. Dimension tool from the center line to there. Excellent, and we want that to be 8.5. If you remember, our original size was 17, so it's half of that, and you'll see now if I zoom in, that line is touching the top of the alloy wheel. Now it's the same with this one. Just here we want that down to the line, and that is going to be 8 because the sticking out bit was 1 inch. Okay, so you can see that that's now touching there as well. I want a fairly low profile tyre, and that's where you can pick how you want it. If you want a big chunky one, you can do it a little bit more. I'm going to put it as 0.7. Okay, it's fairly thin looking. Then using your scissors, we can chop these inner bits, these inner details away, and you've got your shape of the tyre. There's a couple parts that I haven't dimensioned there actually. In fact, that one needs to be touching the outside. I want it level with the outside, and I'm going to check the other side as well. Should be lined up. Check that at 0. It's fully constrained. So in fact that one's looking like it's saying over constrained, so if I escape the dimension I should be able to delete this constraint and it's back to normal again. Anything flashes up red, it normally means there's a problem. So we're going to tick, and we can look at our tyre design there. We're going to revolve, but I'm going to go back and add some detail to that sketch in a moment to show you how that will look then, before we then start to hollow it out. So we'll revolve that. What we're missing at the moment is a line to revolve it round, and if you remember, this was really important in the revolves in the first 2 tutorials. So let's go back into Sketch 10 and edit. We need a line that we're going to use as our axes to revolve around. It has to be dotted to show that it's horizontal, and then we'll just click the tick. Now our revolve, we need to click the sketch that we want, so it's that, and the axes, which is the line that we drew. Revolve axes and the line. Okay, one really important part, we don't want it to form part of the alloy and all look like one big solid block. We want it to be a new part at the top here, and you see in your parts list now you'll have a second part. It's always good practice to name those as well. So if we click tick, we now have our tyre added on to our alloy wheel, and it's starting to look that little bit more realistic. But we always have grooves in tyres to get rid of the water and maintain that traction on the ground. So we're going to go back into Sketch 10, edit, and we're going to view it from the right. We're just going to add a couple of grooves, as in 2 grooves towards the edges in there, and we're going to dimension them up as well. So from the edge, let's make that 1.5 in. We'll make them 1 inch wide, and we're going to do that the same on both. Symmetry always looks quite nice. So 1.5 in and 1 wide, so they're fairly wide grooves. The distance then from the top we want to be even as well. This is how deep the groove's going to go into the tyre. I'm just going to make it 0.2 and make that the same on both. The amount going up above the top really doesn't matter because we're going to cut that away. So using the scissors function again, we're going to cut away all these bits above. So you can see that it steps around there. Finish that sketch, and now my tyre's got a couple of streamlines. We're going to add them other patterns going around the tyre in a moment. We just haven't got that far yet. So that's one revolve that we've done where we've started our tyre. The next step for me will be hollowing it out. So I'm going to make the actual alloy invisible, clicking the I button, and then we're going to shell. So we're going to use a shell feature here. The face to remove is this inside face, and we're going to make it 0.2 inches thick. So it's fairly thick and rigid, and you can see it's adding that real depth of realism to the tyre now. It's starting to look like a more realistic part. So we can unhide. You can't actually see that shell when it's all assembled, but that's fine. That's probably good practice. Now we're going to look at it from the top, and we're going to add the first couple of patterns. Again, you can be creative with these. What I'm going to show you is just an example. So new sketch, we're on the top work plane, and we're going to create a couple of grooves. So I'm going to go for just an arrow style pattern. Okay, I'm not going to dimension it. That's going to be absolutely fine for this stage. You can go to town with your design and see how interesting you want it to be. What you'll notice is that that is on the completely wrong work plane. I can't extrude that now from the tyre. So I'm going to have to create a brand new work plane, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So I'm going to delete that sketch, and before I create it again, I'm going to click work plane at the top here. I want it offset from the top work plane, and then I'm going to look at my view from the front, and I want that to be lined up slightly above my tyre. So you see I've taken that way above there, bring it back down, and now it should be fine. And that's a new work plane for me to work on. So I'm now going to sketch on the top work plane, and I'm going to start to cut away some lines from here. I'm not going to make it too angled, else it's going to make it very complicated when I come to cut it away. I just want some details to show it looks more like a tyre. Try and get it fairly even on both sides, and we click the tick. So hopefully now this is going to extrude, and we're going to remove it from the tyre option. So click the extrude, we're going to click onto that, we want it to remove. We're going down not that far because we don't want it to cut all of our part away. Let's just play about with the numbers to see what it looks like, and I think 0.6 is going to work. Make sure that the merge scope is part 2, which is a tyre, not part 1, which is the alloy, and I'm going to click tick in there. So you can see it's started to add that detail to my tyre, and I'm going to revolve that now around. But as you know, before, or not revolve, sorry, circular pattern it around the wheel or around the tyre. We need to create the axes, so we're going to create a new sketch. The work plane that it'll need to be on is the right, and I'm going to draw a line, making sure it's dotted so I know it's horizontal, coming out of there. So that's going to be the line that we revolve around. Circular pattern around, I keep making that mistake, on purpose of course. Circular pattern, we want to change to feature pattern as we did prior to this, and we're going to select the feature 2 pattern, which is extrude 7. Okay, the axis of the pattern is this line, and then the number that we're putting in is completely up to you, and just experiment. If I put 25 in, that's what it's going to look like, so I'm actually going to try with 30, and that looks more like what I'm aiming for. So click tick, and I'm fairly happy with the look of my tyre and my alloy at this stage. It's not perfect, There's things that I could improve, but I'm fairly happy with it. To finish it off, I'm going to add a small chamfer onto the two outside edges of my tyre. And if you see, I selected the face, so it did both edges, and hopefully that's going to give me a more realistic look to it. And I've got my wheel, my detailed wheel in there. To finish off, the final thing I'd recommend doing now is right clicking on part 1 and part 2 independently and editing their appearance. So what you can do is change their colour. All I'm going to do is change my alloy to a silver. I'm going to change part 2, edit appearance, to a much darker grey. I'm not going to go black because it gets rid of all the detail, but I'm going to go a much darker grey. And I'm going to click tick, and now we've got that wheel looking much more realistic. Okay, hopefully you can get to that point. Good luck.